2026 marks the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, the founding document of the United States, and, as I argue, the framework for an American popular culture mosaic. This is the Everything's a Primary Source podcast, the show dedicated to learning history through pop culture. I'm your host, Eric Salmonson. To commemorate this national milestone, I put together the America at 250 Public History Road Trip. The journey started in the spring in New Hampshire, and then, in the week leading up to July 4th, it was Chicago, down Route 66 to Litchfield, Illinois, west along the interstates and state highways to Dodge City, Kansas, and finally up in the Rockies in Colorado Springs. I stopped at museums and historic sites along the way, inviting folks to drop in and share a story, connecting their lives to the media, people, and places that matter to them. Each one a unique piece of that national mosaic. This season is a chance to step back and see how those stories come together, because pop culture, by definition, unites us and creates a beautiful, colorful American collage. The Everything is a Primary Source podcast is, therefore, a way to understand your history, my history, our history through popular culture. Dave, thanks for joining me here at the New Hampshire Telephone Museum in Warner, New Hampshire. It'd be weird if they had the New Hampshire Telephone Museum anywhere else but in New Hampshire. So you work here sometimes, right? You volunteer?
I volunteer here, yeah, from time to time, and volunteer on some projects that we've done at the museum here, and also help out sometimes with visitors.
It has so many different layers to it. It seems like a very direct, very specific kind of museum, but just the idea of telephone, I mean, it opens up a whole world, doesn't it?
It opens up a whole world, and it opens up a world to, I found two different groups. One, the older folks that come in, sometimes tour buses come here and so on. And when they come in, they say, oh, I remember this, I remember that, oh, I remember dialing, I remember the party lines that we had and so on. And so it brings back a lot of memories for them. And then the other group is the younger kids that have no idea that there was actually a telephone network around. They've grown up with cell phones, and you give them a dial on a telephone, they don't know how to use it. They've never dialed a phone before, and they find it fascinating to be able to do these things. So it's so much fun to see these two different groups interact here.
They don't understand being tethered to a device when they're on the phone.
Exactly.
You know, they just don't. And like I didn't even think about that until you just said it. The dial tone.
Yes.
When you're calling on your phone, your cell phone, it doesn't do that. It just goes directly to the number, or it doesn't.
Right. Yeah.
Whereas I do recall, of course, picking up the phone and hearing, as you're waiting for the number. If you waited long enough, you'd hear a voice come on saying.
Right, and a lot of the kids don't realize they still use you're still dialing a number when you call somebody. Say dial this number, and have no idea what the origin of that word, where it came from.
Yeah, dial is...
You don't dial anymore.
Right. When the phone does ring here at the front desk, is there like a mad dash to try to figure out which phone is ringing in this museum?
Yeah, there are literally hundreds of phones in the museum here. So, but the outside line only comes into the main desk.
I was going to say, that'd be a heck of a prank to somebody pull, that each time it rings, it's a different phone. You have to go find it.
I will say that there are a few phones in here that do ring from various sources, and part of it is the mystique of coming in here and trying to figure out this phone's ringing. Should I pick it up? Should I answer it? And people can. If you come here to visit, you can. If a phone rings, we encourage you just pick it up and answer it and see who's there.
What I find fascinating about this and other museums like it, where they have one particular topic, is that behind each one of these things, all of these different phones that are surrounding us are products of their time periods, and behind them are stories. There are people that had jobs related to what they were. You had innovation, you had inventors. What we're going to talk about today comes from about 50 years or so ago, when and telephony is a word. I remember learning that from this museum, that it's an actual study of that, where by the mid to late 20th century, so much had gone on that allowed for, how would you describe the people that were involved in the blue box, these phone freaks, you call them?
Yes, the phone phreaking was a phenomenon back in mostly about the 1970s or so. It went away for some technical reasons, which I'll get into in a bit. But they were called phone phreaks, and long before the internet, there was actually an internet of speaking, of an internet of a type. It was an internet of copper wire, where the entire country and actually the entire world was interconnected with the network, where you could communicate from one point to another, but all over just copper wire. And that was kind of the internet of the 1970s, where you couldn't, there was no wireless communications, things like that, but you could communicate over wires, obviously by telephone. And but this also created an interesting subgroup of people called phone phreaks, who looked at the telephone system, which was actually in the United States controlled completely by Ma Bell at that time. It was a monopoly. And they looked at it and they found some flaws inside the system where they could actually get inside the internal workings of the phone system and talk to each other. Nothing was ever done maliciously. It was mostly done out of curiosity and the idea of being able to do it, to be able to connect from one person to another through a kind of clandestine network inside the phone system, just by utilizing a flaw that they had within the system. And so this came about because the phone company had published inadvertently had published the information on how the internal workings are of long-distance trunk lines.
Whoops.
Yeah, they published the frequencies that they used. It's called multi-frequency tones, and they published that and published how the system worked. And of course, when you do that and you get somebody that's curious and has a technical background, they figured out that, hey, there's a flaw in this system, the way they worked. And I can explain briefly how the flaw worked on it. The phone system used these long trunk lines, which would connect from one city to another and then to another city. And these trunk lines were all controlled by multi-frequency tones. And they had different types of tones, and they're totally different from what you might hear on an old touch-tone phone. One of the main things on the trunk lines was this thing called a guard tone, which is a 2600 cycle tone. And that told the trunk lines the connections between the cities, whether to connect or to disconnect, and what to do and how to route calls. So somebody figured out you could actually play that tone right through your phone, and the phone trunk system wouldn't know the difference whether it was an internal tone or an external tone. So the first thing they discovered was that if you play that 2600 cycle tone, and I can actually play one.
Yeah, I'd love to hear that.
It.
It's such a, it'll add so much to it.
So I have in my hand actually a blue box, which was made under some new technology, but they were also made under the older technology. So you would call an 800 number, it would ring, and then you'd play this tone. And the trunk line would hear that tone and say, oh, I'll disconnect from the 800 number, but I'm waiting for another call. But the billing always went to the 800 number, which was toll free. So now the trunk line's waiting for another call, and then you could set these other special tones in and redirect the trunk line to any place you wanted. The tones would sound like this. And these tones are different from the tones that the outside telephone lines use, but those were those frequencies that got published. And so you could redirect your call anywhere, and the billing always stayed to the original 800 number. So you never got billed, and you could dial anywhere. One of the things that we had done back there in the 70s, somebody had discovered a phone booth in London. And so we could call that phone booth with the blue box. and you could call it day and night, and you just let it ring and just wait for somebody to answer, and you just talk to them.
Hello.
Exactly.
You call a red box with a blue box and,
Yes.
and see how they're doing and ask what the future holds because they're ahead of us in time zone and everything.
Right, yeah. So that was one of the fun things. And the other thing was there was internal places inside the phone system where people could call, and they'd be able to connect with each other like a chat room or a party line. And one phone phreak could talk to another phone phreak internally and inside the phone system.
Support for this episode comes from iCivics. As we celebrate the 250th anniversary of our nation, iCivics is looking ahead to see how we'll bring that history to life in the classroom this fall. As you plan your upcoming curriculum, put Investigation Declaration at the top of your list. In this new game from iCivics, middle and high school students don't just read about 1776, they live it as Secret Agent 6. Their mission? To stop the global crime ring BARF, the baddies against rights and freedom, from erasing the foundations of our democracy. It's the perfect way to turn this 250th milestone into a season of discovery. Give your students a deeper understanding of natural rights and the social contract on their own terms. Get a head start on your best school year yet. Explore the Investigation Declaration now at bit.ly/investigation declaration. The point of this particular season of the podcast is to connect things back to the Declaration of Independence on top of asking the question that I usually do about the primary source. What's interesting is I'm making connections to the Declaration of Independence, the Revolutionary War first. I mean, most notably with that connection to London. You know, when somebody in London picks up, you would just hang up and be like, this is America, bye. You know, just to remind you. And but I'm thinking about that bicentennial era. And I don't think that the bicentennial itself was inspiring this. I think it's just an American thing to challenge the system. And especially if you have people who are able to have that. I mean, I wouldn't know the first thing about matching tones or finding ways around it, but those technical brains, that is whatever time period they're in. You go back to the 1750s and 60s, you have Ben Franklin and his group who are fiddling around with electricity, and they're trying to work, and they're doing scientific research, and that all goes in with the Enlightenment era, which the Declaration of Independence is a product of. So you fast forward, I mean, they set the tone, no pun intended, then. You move ahead 200 years to the 1970s, and that spirit is still going. In this case, all right, you have a monopoly, you have the phone system. Here's these rebels, right? I mean, would you consider the makers of the Blue Box and those who are trying to... You said they weren't doing anything malicious. They were just seeing what they could get away with, kind of.
Exactly. The phone phreaks, and some of the phone phreaks were actually quite famous. Steve Jobs, Wozniak, they were both involved with that, and they said that if it wasn't for phone phreaking, Apple might not exist today, because there's that curiosity, there's that independence, there's a challenge to it, and that the challenge is maybe part of the American spirit too, that hey, there's something that can be done, and I'm going to do it. So,
I remember seeing Steve Jobs in an interview talking about this and saying how they would make a call on one payphone, make it go around the world, and it would call the next one. And he says directly, he was like, it was patently illegal. We're glad that we weren't caught. I'm like, well, you just said it to the camera. You know, hopefully the statute of limitations on this is up. But, you know, they haul away the Apple Computers guy for phone phreaking. But what you're saying is that was perhaps a necessary step for these guys moving from being just messing around with computers, early computer technology, to then revolutionizing, quite literally, our entire way of life with their computers.
Yeah, I think it's just that challenge of technology in general. I think that was like the first step of their technological journey. And I think once they realized they could do that, maybe that gave them the confidence that they could go on and they could do anything else. And then they got involved with computers.
What was, I mean, those are two examples, but in general, what was the role or status? Are we talking about younger people? Was it dominated more by men than women? Were they pretty educated, the phone phreaks?
I would say probably they were mostly young people. I was certainly in college at the time, so and probably not too different from Steve Jobs' age at this point. So I would say, but they were mostly all younger people. I don't recall whether, and it didn't really make much difference whether men and women were involved. But I would say probably maybe more men at that point. But yeah.
So having some kind of background either in your garage or in maybe a college laboratory setting would have probably helped, right?
Oh, absolutely. You had to have that technical background. My background being electrical technology. I was going to school at the time, but also had a 2-year degree in electrical technology. So I was able to design the circuits that made those tones, and so we just did it from scratch and built it in and went from there.
And that was still a time period. I mean, I guess what I'm trying to narrow down is what all this tells us about the era, that it was a time period. I know you said that the telephone system was a monopoly, but the other components of it and the possibilities of what communication technology could bring us was still wide open. It was anybody's game. Anybody could get into it and be the leader of that. And that doesn't happen unless you have an educational system without having colleges accessible to people all over, without having a lot of emphasis on in the culture of like, be inventive, be creative, try new things. Maybe leftovers from the early 1960s still there. I mean, the space program was hugely influential on everyday people. Have you ever seen the movie October Sky? It's about a young man in West Virginia named Home. It's a true story, and they see him and his friends see Sputnik, and he's in high school. And so he gets so inspired by rocket technology that he starts messing around with rockets. And his science teacher helps him a little bit, but it's mostly him and his friends doing all of this experimenting. And he ends up going to a science at a college. He goes and wins a scholarship and does all these things, and then ends up working for NASA. But he's in this coal mining town in West Virginia starting out. But that's his key. His intellect, his mind is looking quite literally to the stars. And thankfully, in the 1950s and into the 60s, there's avenues, there's pathways for him to follow. Once he gets out of his town, he's able to then go to this next step and next step and next step. So the same thing would go with, 10 years later, 10, 20 years later, if you are messing around with and trying new things with phones, you have an outlet, don't you? You have a way to apply that. Instead of just saying, oh, we're being phone phreaks, we could actually turn this into our lives, our careers.
Yeah, I think exactly. And I think part of it is just certain people have a mentality of thinking in a certain direction. And if you can do this, if I can do this, I can do that. If I can do one thing, I can do another. And I think that's what probably led to the computer revolution and to the internet and everything else that we see today.
Do you think that, because before we hit record, we were referring to this as like the earlier version of like a VPN, where it's masking where you are. There's you're using the phone, but almost like a Gabby Hoffman type thing, right? Of like you're trying to mess with is it Gabby Hoffman I'm thinking of, the guy who like taught people how to do little scams and stuff like that.
Yes, he wrote. I think he wrote a book called "Steal This Book."
Yeah,
yes.
And just little things.
Yes.
Take it to the man in little tiny ways, not full on pitchforks and torches revolution,
right.
But just little things to chip away at it. And it seems to be in that same kind of spirit. I don't know if we still have that. I mean, VPNs they're normal. Like everybody, it's not like they're advertised on terrestrial radio and podcasts, of course, but Is that kind of like, is that the extension of this, or is it?
I suppose it could be with VPNs. VPNs just give you a private way of connecting from one point to another, and that certainly is what was happening with phone phreaking. But I think maybe one of the differences of VPN today is more designed for security, where back then that security had nothing to do with it other than not getting caught. But it was, I think, much more open back then. In a sense, phone phreaks would have a VPN that was open to anybody who could phone phreak and get back into it. So.
You have a book that is some source material. Tell us about that book, and I couldn't help but notice who the foreword was written by.
Yes, Phil Lapsley. This is the book is called "Exploding the Phone," and he did a lot of research on phone phreaking. And actually, it was through a meeting that we had with Phil from the Telephone Museum here and him on a Zoom meeting one time, which got my interest perked back into phone phreaking. I had was involved with that back in the 1970s and had kind of put it back on the back shelf and forgotten about it for many, many years until I found out about this meeting with Phil. And he perked my interest again. And so those tones you heard earlier was from a blue box that I had built as a demonstration at the Telephone Museum here. But he was very instrumental in kind of bringing back some of this, the interest in the story of phone phreaking. So.
And Steve Wozniak wrote the foreword on it, right?
And Steve Wozniak wrote the foreword on it, yeah.
I don't know if the 1970s get enough credit for being as influential on our lives as they are. I mean, there's so much that happened then that people don't, they usually don't think of it. And I said before, I mean, that was the bicentennial era. I think it's a coincidence. I don't think it was like, hey, 1976 is coming. Let's start acting, like that. It's just kind of that's just Americans. I mean, that's just American culture.
I would agree. The 1970s, I think, was the beginning of a revolution of communications, of so many things that had changed the lives of everybody. I think started back in the 1970s, really.
Yeah, because you think of the 80s. The 80s are the computer era, but I'm like, that had to come from somewhere. It wasn't. It didn't just show up.
Its birthplace was in the 70s.
Yeah. When those things, we're in an area that has a lot of wooden phones, and if I'm not mistaken, I think the first Apple computer was actually bolted onto wood. So it's like the plastic box computer with the glass screen. I mean, that's something that evolved, but it all started with, just tinkering. And
started with a prototype.
That kind of thing. Yeah. Well, I thank you so much. Speaking of prototypes, this is the first episode of this journey, and if people are listening to this episode in the car, those dial tones and stuff won't mess with their vehicle, will it?
I don't think so.
Okay, I hope not. We'll maybe I'll put a little warning at the beginning and be like, just so you know, because everything is all digital now. But thank you so much, Dave. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Okay, thank you much.
Each podcast episode has us uncovering another piece of the mosaic that is the American experience through pop culture. It's what connects us across backgrounds and perspectives. These episodes are here to be enjoyed, but they're also built to spark learning in and out of the classroom. Visit everything-history.com to learn more. Be sure to like and share this episode and the podcast itself. You can follow Everything as a Primary Source on social media, including YouTube and especially Instagram. I look forward to you joining me again next time on the EPS podcast, where everything is a primary source.